everyone. Good morning. I'm Carol Massar from Bloomberg Businessweek TV and radio. Welcome to day 4 of the Bloomberg Businessweek. It's our week-long event, bringing the magazine to life, offering a window into the journey as we go to press. Well, today's programming is focused on power and policy. President Biden has altered U.S. policy priorities, focusing on overcoming COVID-19, addressing climate change and social inequalities. We know the global pandemic has also proven how crucial it is to have effective and smart governing in place and the power of partnership with industry. Well, today we're going to hear from the change makers paving the way forward and about how to lead in a time of crisis. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping announcements. First, I'd like to acknowledge our solutions sponsor, Deloitte, our presenting sponsor, InterSystems, and our supporting sponsor, Indiana Economic Development Corporation. If you experience any issues with audio or video quality, try to refresh your browser or use the chat box in the bottom right corner of your screen for support. You're also going to be able to submit questions during the interviews. While we're probably not going to get to all of you, we will certainly try to. Now, to submit a question, please click open the white tab on the right-hand side of the video window and submit your questions. Please engage with us, too, on social media using hashtag #TheBusinessWeek, and engage with other attendees in the event chat in the bottom right corner of your screen. We have quite a day ahead of us, and we do want to kick everything off today with a great first person, someone who has been a go-to voice for us during the last 12, 13, 14 months when it comes to COVID-19 and the vaccine. Let me welcome Dr. Anthony Fauci. He's director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and, of course, the U.S. National Institutes of Health. He is in conversation with our own David Weston of Bloomberg.
Make your mark on the future and grow a business powered by our diverse community of problem solvers and boundary breakers. It's time to take your ideas further in a state that works.
I'm David Weston, and on behalf of Bloomberg Businessweek, it's my delight to welcome Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is, of course, the chief medical advisor for President Biden, and also the longtime director of the National Institutes for Health Institute on Allergy and Infectious Medicine. So welcome back to Bloomberg. Great to have you here, Dr. Fauci. Let me start with the most basic question, perhaps the Bloomberg people particularly would ask. We now are opening the economy back up, really, truly opening it up across the board. Is it safe? What are the risks we still are facing, maybe of yet another wave?
Well, David, the more and more people that we get vaccinated, the less and less likely there's going to be another wave. The wild card, positive wild card we have now that we did not have when we experienced the 3 big surges that our country has experienced. The most difficult one was at the end of the fall and early winter as we transitioned from 2020 to 2021, where we went up to a terribly high level of 300,000 cases a day and 3,000 deaths. We are now coming down in a rather significant manner that we've dropped cases from 60,000 a day to down to 50, 40, and now we're in the 30s, which is really good news. We don't want to declare victory prematurely, but if we can get the 70% of adults vaccinated with at least 1 dose by the 4th of July, the way the president has set the goal, I think the chances of there being a surge or a rebound is extremely low. That's the reason why we want to continue to get people vaccinated and even get to that somewhat recalcitrant group that really doesn't want to get vaccinated, because the more and more we get, the higher the percentage, the less likely there'll be a problem. And that would mean we could safely get back to normal, get the economy back to where we want it, get people enjoying things that they have not had the opportunity to enjoy now for well over a year. So we're going in that direction, but we've got to keep putting on the pressure, as it were, to continue to get people vaccinated.
So, Dr. Fauci, I want to talk about the, as we call them, vaccine hesitant. But before I do that, let's talk about the role of social distancing, mask wearing, some of the guidelines we had in getting those numbers back down in the United States, as opposed to the vaccines. To what extent was it the social distancing and the masks? And let's be honest, there's some confusion around the country right now about masks.
Yeah, I think the confusion is, and we've been discussing this over the past couple of days, David, is an understandable confusion. As the data accumulated as to the effectiveness, the real world effectiveness in vaccines in protecting you from getting infected, and even if you get a breakthrough infected, of preventing you from spreading it to anyone else. There was strong suggestions that that was the case. Over the last several weeks to a month, the data have become very clear that if you're fully vaccinated and an otherwise healthy person, the chances of your getting infected is remarkably low, really quite low. It's good against the variants, number two. And number three, even if you do get a breakthrough infected, the level of virus in your nasopharynx would be low enough that it is extremely unlikely that you would infect anyone else. Having said that, and documenting that, the CDC came out with guidance a few days ago last week and said if you are fully vaccinated, you should feel safe that you can go without a mask, not only outdoors, but also indoors. That was directed specifically at people who were fully vaccinated. The problem is, David, that what happened is that people interpreted that that was a signal to say that you don't need masks anymore, which absolutely is not the case, because for people who are not vaccinated and still vulnerable and susceptible to infection, that you still have to follow the CDC guidelines that have not at all changed for that group. And that's where the confusion is. It applies only to people who are fully vaccinated.
So, Doctor, clearly it applies only to those fully vaccinated, and those of us who are fully vaccinated feel privileged to have that. But we don't know who's fully vaccinated. So if I'm running a business, whether it's a small retail store or it's a huge company, I don't necessarily know who's vaccinated and who's not. How do I figure out which is which?
Well, David, you just hit the nail right on the head of what the issue is. Since we are not centrally requiring proof of vaccinations, namely from the federal government on down, you gave an example which is a perfect example of what we're facing. So let's say I'm an owner of an establishment, whatever that establishment is, and I am aware of the CDC guidelines saying that if people who are vaccinated can feel safe outdoors and indoors without a mask, what I don't know is coming into my establishment who's vaccinated and who's not, which means you don't know who's infected and who's not, and what the risk of transmitting an infection within my establishment. And it's for that reason why there are some establishment owners and people responsible for the establishment who are saying, full understanding the CDC guidelines, if you want to come into my establishment, you have to wear a mask. And that's where some of the confusion is, David, because you're saying, wait a minute, the CDC is saying that if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. And now you're telling me I have to wear a mask if I come into your... That's something that needs to be cleared up for sure. But what we are going to see, and we're seeing it already, is that there are organizations, particularly universities and colleges, who are saying, notwithstanding what the federal government is requiring, if you want to come into campus and be in-person learning, you're going to have to show proof of vaccination. Cruise ships will likely be doing that. Airlines will likely be doing that. So you're going to have at the local independent level things that the federal government is not going to be mandating.
Dr. Fauci, even if I'm fully vaccinated, should I be concerned about wearing a mask because I might be worried about transmitting it to someone else? Even if I might not get sick myself, what do we know about the risk of transmission of those who are fully vaccinated?
That's a great question, David. And that was one of the three things that the CDC considered when they made the recommendation. They were reluctant early on for the simple reason of what you brought as an example, because we knew that the original trials of the vaccine showed they were very efficacious in preventing clinically recognizable disease. Weren't quite sure how effective they were in preventing asymptomatic disease. And if a person gets asymptomatically infected, what is the chance of their transmitting it to someone else? And for that reason, the CDC guideline was, even if you are vaccinated, you should be wearing a mask, particularly indoors. because we don't know what the risk. What's happened since then is that a number of studies have come out which have shown that the vaccines are even more effective in the real world than they were in the clinical trials. So that's really good news. But number two, the chances of getting infected in an asymptomatic way are extremely low. And even if you are vaccinated and have a breakthrough infection, the level of virus in your nasopharynx is much, much lower than the level that you would have if you were not vaccinated, diminishing even more the likelihood that you were going to inadvertently and innocently infect someone else. And that was one of the reasons why they came around and made a change in the guidelines.
So, Doctor, that's very reassuring, but clarify one thing. And when you go on the internet, there's some information, and you're going to tell me as a doctor I shouldn't be going on the internet probably for this information, but suggesting there might be a difference with respect to the effect on transmission among the vaccines. That is to say, mRNA, for example, the Pfizer-BioNTech, is more effective at curtailing transmission than perhaps Johnson & Johnson. Is there any scientific basis for that?
They haven't been compared head to head. Most of the data, David, that we have is related to the mRNAs, either the Pfizer-BioNTech or the Moderna. But if you look at overall efficacies, all three of them are highly effective vaccines. What we don't know is the question you're asking. Did we compare this vaccine with this vaccine as to whether or not asymptomatic infections can transmit or not? We just don't have that data.
Do we have data about how long my vaccination is going to be effective for me? I mean, you have now recently said you think we're going to have booster shots maybe every year. Do we have a sense of exactly how long this is going to be effective?
You know, we don't know. I mean, I made that statement, but probably it was a little bit misinterpreted. I'm not sure we're going to need a booster. We might. And if so, I don't know at what point following the vaccinations will we need it. I think that's still uncharted waters. But what we are doing to try and get a reasonable answer to your question is we're following people from the original clinical trials and looking at the level of a laboratory indicator of protection, which is the level of your antibodies. If it starts coming down, the slope of the decline would predict how long you might wait before you need a booster. And again, we don't know when that would be. I don't think, I mean, I said perhaps a year. I probably shouldn't have said that because then people are assuming absolutely you're going to need one at the end of the year. I said it is likely that we will need at some time a booster. We're really not quite sure when that will be.
Doctor, give us a sense about the, as we call them, vaccine hesitant. Last time I checked the numbers, we have something like 60% of the country that has at least their first shot. We're approaching 50%, I guess, that's fully vaccinated. At the same time, it's perceived that there's a significant plurality of the country who really are resistant to vaccines. First of all, do we have a sense of how large that plurality is? Is it 20%? Is it 30%? How big is it?
You know, it's unclear. It's looking like it's more 15%. But again, those numbers vary whenever you take a look at it from a different survey. But whatever the number is, David, it's really unfortunate because we are so fortunate that we have dealing with the most devastating pandemic in well over 100 years, and we happen, to our benefit, have highly, highly effective vaccines that could protect us, our family, and our society. The idea of not utilizing that, you know, often you have a situation where you have a really serious problem, but you have no solution. Here we have a really serious problem, and we have an absolutely proven solution. So it's so frustrating when you see, and, you know, not to point fingers at all, because people have individual reasons that you'd like to try and explain to them why it would be so important to get vaccinated. Yet for one reason or other, they don't want to. But I think if you look at the benefit to you as an individual, to your family, and to society, it's so overwhelming leaning towards getting vaccinated that I would hope as we get further and further that more and more people see why it's so important to get vaccinated. You know, what's very interesting is the very people who don't want to get vaccinated don't like the restrictions that are put on them by public health. And if you want to get rid of the restrictions, get vaccinated and the restrictions will disappear. I promise you that.
Well, I'm curious, Doctor, on that point. There's a lot of research being done about this virus, about vaccines. Are we doing research about what might change people's minds, those who might be hesitant? For example, what you just suggested is, look, if you want to be able to go back out in society, you need to get vaccinated. Is that changing people's minds? Is giving people a free beer, the way that Phil Murphy, the governor of New Jersey, is doing, is that working? Or $1 million in a lottery in Ohio? Do we have any sense about what might change people's minds?
I don't believe, David, that there's really any specific research looking at that, but there is something that is going on. And that is that we've established a COVID-19 community cohort, in the sense of a community situation where you have trusted messengers, people who, the person or persons who are reluctant to get vaccinated might trust much more a sports figure, an entertainment figure, a clergy member, which is very, very important for some people, or even their private doctor. Those are the people we're trying to get information to so that they can go out and try and convince people, at least in a non-pejorative way, try and explain to them what is the reason why you don't want to get vaccinated. You know, some people say, well, I don't trust the vaccine because I think it was done too quickly. Well, there was really a good reason why it was done so quickly, but that is the incredible investment that was made in basic and clinical biomedical research that allowed us to go from discovering a virus in January of 2020 and having doses going into people's arms 11 months later in December. Most people look at that and they say, there's something wrong with that picture. It was too quick. Well, it wasn't. It really was a reflection of extraordinary investment. And I think when you get trusted messengers out there trying to convince people of why their reasons for not wanting to get vaccinated may not be valid.
So, Doctor, as you say, there's a whole host of reasons, different reasons why people might be hesitant. But are you also playing against somebody on the other side? And I'm talking about particularly social media. There's a piece out in Bloomberg Businessweek right now about the disinformation of vaccines on the web, and particularly social media, and basically taking some information that we get generated on data we generate from the U.S. vaccine adverse event reporting system and using it back against us. Is there anything we can do about social media? Do you perceive them as a substantial foe, an opponent in this battle?
You know, there's so many good things about social media of getting important information widely disseminated. But, David, it's really been a very, very difficult problem of the misinformation, sometimes deliberate, which is really unfortunate. I mean, particularly talking about the vaccine adverse events reporting that just reports anything that ever happens to people. That does not necessarily mean it's related to the vaccine. It's something that happened. I mean, if you just look in general society at any given week or month, a certain number of people are going to get heart attacks, are going to commit suicide, are going to be in automobile accidents, are going to get really sick, even without any vaccines being distributed. So when you distribute vaccines and these things happen to people, they get reported. It doesn't mean it's related to the vaccine. And yet sometimes in the social media, they say, look, this happened at the time a person was vaccinated, therefore it's an adverse event. That's an egregious distortion of what the reality is.
Dr. Fauci, there's also a lot of report about so-called variants that tend to get named after the country where they're first discovered. And right now, of course, we have India, which may be the most frightening variant of all. Given the fact that this virus continues around the world, we are not stamping it out, is it just a matter of time before there is a variant that, in fact, is resistant to the vaccines that we have?
You know, not necessarily at all, David. And one of the ways that you can prevent that from happening is treating this as a global pandemic and trying to get the entire world vaccinated. there's a very important tenet in virology, is that viruses don't mutate if they don't replicate. So if you prevent it from spreading from person to person and replicating, it's not going to mutate. So the easiest way to prevent the emergence of a problematic mutant, which would lead to a variant, the easiest way to do that is to get as many people throughout the world vaccinated as quickly as you possibly can. Because if you have a country like the United States, which sometime, let's say in the summer, we're really in good shape, we got a lot of people vaccinated, the level of infection has gone way, way down, and yet you have other regions of the world where there's a very robust viral dynamic and people are getting infected, the chances of there being the emergence of a variant there are strong, and that variant might come here. That's the reason why we've got to treat it as a global pandemic, not of an epidemic just in our own country.
Dr. Fauci, maybe one of the questions I hear most often is about children, about how we should be handling children. We now have authorization to go down to 12 years old, as I understand it, to vaccinate. When do you think that there might be research that will support going below 12 years old with vaccinations?
David, it's going on right now. In fact, a couple of the companies, including Moderna and Pfizer and others, not just those two, but others, are doing what's called age de-escalation studies. Namely, since children are vulnerable, as are pregnant women, you want to be very careful when you give vaccinations to them on a large scale. You want to make sure it's safe and effective in a normal adult population. And then you go down by age. So we know now, at least with Pfizer, 12 to 15, you can vaccinate. What we're doing now is going 12 to 9, looking if that's okay. If that's okay, 9 years old to 6 years old, if that's okay. 6 years old to 2 years old, if that's okay, then 6 months to 2 years old. And we anticipate that by the time we get to the end of this calendar year and the beginning of the first quarter of 2022, we likely will have enough information to feel comfortable in vaccinating children of any age.
Dr. Fauci, forgive me, I want to go one half step back because we've got a question from a viewer that I want to ask you really about the question of international spread of the virus and what specifically could the U.S. do to really make sure COVID vaccines get around the world? Well, how could we help the situation in other countries?
Well, we can help the situation in other countries by taking a leadership role in trying to galvanize an effort to get vaccines to people in developing nations, low and middle income countries that don't have the capability or the resources to vaccinate their own population. There are several ways, David, to do that. One is to actually get vaccines to them that you make right here and just ship it to them. The other is to help provide what's called technology transfer, where you transfer the capability of making their own vaccine to countries, for example, in Africa, in South America, in certain Asian countries. So you have not only that you're giving vaccinations to people to distribute, but you're actually providing for them the capability in collaboration with the companies to transfer their technology to be able to make doses for themselves. If we do that, and I believe we, the United States, being a country that has done that with other diseases, we did it with HIV, and President George W. Bush, when he established the PEPFAR program, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, got drugs and treatment, prevention, and care to developing nations, particularly in Southern Africa, to the point that now that program, which began in 2003, has saved anywhere from 14 to 18 million lives. So we have taken a leadership role globally with other diseases, and I believe we can do that with COVID-19.
So, Dr. Fauci, as you know, parts of the pharmaceutical industry really have some problems with the transfer of technology, because it's not just the patents, it's also the know-how, how to produce this material, particularly when it comes to mRNA, which is a true breakthrough, as I understand it, scientifically in using that for vaccines. Once you've given that to other countries, you can't necessarily get it back, and it spreads around the world. What do you respond to that?
Well, we know, and again, I go back to the example with HIV. Back then, when companies were making antiretroviral drugs and were selling it for a considerable amount, $15,000 to $18,000 per year per regimen. In the developed world, it was impossible for the developing world, particularly Southern Africa, to afford that. So generics came in and made similar drugs for $100 a year or $120 a year. And people said, well, that's going to destroy the pharmaceutical companies. You can't do that. Well, the pharmaceutical companies continue to make billions and billions of dollars at the same time that the drugs are being provided to low and middle income countries. So I am very much in favor of protecting the capability of pharmaceutical companies to continue to make a good profit so they can continue to put what it takes to get newer drugs and newer interventions. I'm all for that. But there comes a time when the emergent nature of a situation requires doing things that would allow less well-developed nations to have access to these interventions. And in this case, that intervention is vaccines for COVID-19.
And finally, Dr. Fauci, let's get a little personal here. A lot of people want to take vacations. Even want to take vacations overseas, maybe go to Europe, for example. I'd like to go to Italy toward the end of August. If we're stay on the course we're on right now, obviously things could change. Do you think I can go to Italy safely in late August?
I think that's clearly possible. In fact, there already is discussion on the part of Italian, French, British, et cetera, about opening up the restrictions of travel into their country. And on the other side of the ocean, it's talking right now about when we could start doing that. So I can't guarantee it for you, David, but I would think there's a reasonable chance if we get to the president's goal of getting that high percentage of people with at least one dose of vaccine by the 4th of July, by the time we get to August, it is conceivable, without a guarantee, but quite conceivable that you'll be able to do that.
Dr. Fauci, this is not your first rodeo. I mean, this is different than a lot of others, but you've been through quite a few of these now through your career. What have you learned from this particular pandemic?
Well, what I've learned is the one prevailing issue that I've always said, that my worst nightmare was that we would someday have a situation where a brand new virus that originated in an animal reservoir would jump species, would come here to the world, that would be 1, respiratory borne, 2, highly effective in being transmitted from one person to another, and 3, had a high degree of morbidity and mortality. And sure enough, here we are, unfortunately, living through that worst nightmare of mine, which tells us we must continue to always be prepared from a public health standpoint and from a scientific standpoint. Because, David, one of the great successes in all of this was the science that gave us the vaccines that will be the solution.
Well, exactly. And I have to ask you, to be honest, to be really honest with us, are you surprised we got a vaccine this effective this fast? Because a lot of experts were.
Well, I wouldn't say I was totally surprised. I had said that given the new technologies that I would hope that we would have a vaccine within 12 to 18 months. And you go back on the record, you look, I said that 50 times. And the fact is, from January to December was 11 months. So it was even better than I would have predicted. But no, I'm actually quite pleasantly surprised, not only how quickly it was done, David, but how absolutely effective it is. I mean, to be fortunate enough to have a 94, 95% effective vaccines, we are very fortunate. It's unfortunate we're living through a terrible pandemic, but we are very fortunate to have such a highly effective vaccine.
We are fortunate indeed. And I think I can speak for a lot of people. We feel fortunate to have you where you are as well. Thank you so much to Dr. Anthony Fauci. He is President Biden's chief medical advisor, also the long-term head of the infectious disease and allergy department at the NIH. Thank you. And that does it for this particular episode of Bloomberg Businessweek.
Hi, I'm Amanda Colson-Hurley. I'm the politics editor of Bloomberg Businessweek. And for this edition of How I Got That Story, I'm here with Jennifer Jacobs. She is the senior White House reporter for Bloomberg News. And last year, she landed a pretty spectacular scoop about a Trump administration official who came down with the coronavirus. Jennifer, thanks for being with us today.
Hi, Amanda. Thanks for inviting me.
So I'm hoping you could start out by just telling us about this great scoop that you got, maybe starting on the day of October 1st, because I believe that's the day that you broke it. So could you tell us what you put out in the world and kind of what happened? What were the immediate ripple effects from that?
Well, it started even before that. We had learned in July that the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, had been diagnosed with coronavirus. So we were starting to hear word that some pretty high level Trump administration officials were coming down with the virus. So we broke that news in July, and it turns out it was even earlier than that. We later learned that some people had the virus as early as March, perhaps. We had written before in May about one of the vice president's aides having the virus. So we were aware that it was starting to really spread throughout the White House. In October, when we broke the news about Hope Hicks, who's one of the president's closest advisors, when we learned that she had the coronavirus, it just took a long time to confirm it. So I knew about it fairly early in the day, and it just took a lot of phone calling and trying to reach out to people to figure out who else would have visibility on this story. Not very many people were aware of which administration officials came down with the virus. It was pretty closely held health information, and folks did not really want that shared publicly. So it was pretty tricky to figure out whether this was true, whether it was just a rumor. So we just started calling around to just about every source we could get a hold of, trying to confirm it.
Wow. And what happened from there? Because it had, my recollection is that when the news got out, there were some kind of pretty swift cascading effects after that.
Right, exactly. As soon as the news broke that Hope Hicks had it, the worry was that possibly the president had it. That was the first sign that it had really reached his inner circle, that people he had been with in recent days, including Hope. We knew that she had traveled with him on Air Force One very recently. So we knew that he had either been exposed to her or perhaps that she had gotten it from him. So we knew that the reason why this was such a big deal that she had been diagnosed was because it probably meant that the President of the United States had the virus as well.
Right. And he, I believe, confirmed that he did indeed have the virus shortly thereafter, right?
Right. Within hours, pretty late that night, President Trump put out a statement saying that he did have the virus, and so did the First Lady.
Right. There was speculation at the time that, perhaps this information might not have come out at all, or, would have come out perhaps much, much later or partially if you had not broken that news about Hope Hicks. And what are your thoughts? Was the White House trying to keep this quite close? Obviously, as you said before, this is pretty sensitive health information, so not a lot of people knew anyway.
Yes, the White House, top officials in the White House did not really want this to be reported for many different reasons. As you remember, it was right before the election. We were just a month out from the U.S. presidential election. So that was very sensitive. And the president was trying to keep everything on an even keel and keep the economy running smoothly. And this was just adding much more uncertainty. So, yes, we did know, and I had reporting at the time, that there were conversations inside the White House about what to do about reporters, me, who were calling to find out what was going on and if it was true that Hope was sick. Now, they didn't want to confirm it. It was very difficult to get information on what was happening and what it meant. It's not clear to me whether the president ever would have admitted that he had the virus if this story hadn't become public. I don't know. But what we do know is that it sent a signal to the White House that it was going to be very difficult for them to hide any information about White House officials who had the virus, just because reporters were likely to find out. It was just a big red flag saying, if you try to hide it, you're probably going to get busted for that.
Right, right. I'm interested in, and obviously sources are protected and, kind of sacrosanct for journalists, but I'm interested in your source building. How long had you been covering the Trump White House? When did you start? Was it right at the beginning of the administration, or?
Yes. So I covered the tail end of the Trump campaign when he was running for president in 2016, and got to know some of the Trump outer circle officials. There was a lot of turnover. The few people that did go into the White House from the campaign left fairly quickly, or I guess over time. There were very few people who were what they called originals, who were with Trump from the very beginning, who stayed through all the way to the end of the administration. But I did get to know some of those people on the campaign trail. And then just slowly over time, over the 4 years of the Trump White House, the Trump administration, got to know various sources around the administration. But Bloomberg News travels with the president. We're always at the White House. So we're in close proximity to officials. And I think we had built a lot of trust with our sources over the years that we would report on this fairly, report on any topic with a fair and unbiased manner.
Yeah, I mean, reporters from a lot of outlets, though, get to know people in the White House and travel with the president. So do you think that it was the perception that you would be, that you were trustworthy and would be fair that, maybe made the difference in this case as to why you got the story, rather than someone perhaps from another outlet?
I'm not sure. I think I got the story just because I talked to a lot of people, and I was always talking to the Trump administration officials and just asking what's going on, and just keeping in touch with everybody. I do hope that they thought that I was trustworthy enough that they were willing to confide in me on various things. All of our White House reporters on our Bloomberg team worked really hard to try to make sure that we never report anything that's incorrect or to add any sort of political spin. We're just trying to keep it in context and in good faith report the news. And I think that the Trump administration officials knew that.
So, Jennifer, now you're reporting on the Biden White House, and I'm kind of curious what it's like to, is it kind of a starting from zero experience, or I would think perhaps even with a totally different cast of characters, covering the White House, under one president, maybe sets you up at least to know the best strategies for doing it under the next administration. And how is that going so far?
Well, I always love covering the White House, so it's going really well. But yes, it's very stressful trying to get to know all the new Biden administration officials. It's been particularly tricky during the coronavirus pandemic, just because everyone has been, not everyone, but most officials have been working from home. The White House is slowly starting to bring people from work from home situations where they're coming into the building and working on the White House campus or in actual buildings around the administration. So that has been very difficult to just to meet people and get to know who's who. But it's been great. It's not always smooth. It's not always easy, but it's just a lot of fun. I mean, it's a huge privilege to just cover this administration, and I'm just glad to be doing it.
That's great. Thanks so much for your time today, Jennifer.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'd say this is the year of the chicken parm.
Whoa! 2021, year of the chicken parm.
You heard it here.
It's very possible.
I think so.
Especially with the sauce. We tested hundreds of times. Eating chicken parm with this sauce, eating another chicken parm with this sauce, sandwich, roll, gyro, platter, on the plate. We did it in conventional ovens, we did it in home ovens, we did it in kitchen ovens. We've put in hundreds of hours specifically designing this sauce so that it goes perfectly with chicken parm.
All right, we're gonna make some chicken parm today. Here at Carbone, traditionally we serve veal parm on the menu, but we thought that it was really important that for our sauce that we nail chicken parm, being one of the most popular Italian dishes in the world. So lately I've been making a lot of chicken parm.
So why does this one work, and why should people try this at home with chicken parm, Mario?
It took a long time for us to figure it out. It took a lot of tasting. We tried it in every conceivable way, tweaking the sauce, keep tweaking the techniques. We want to make sure it's not too sweet, it's not too sour.
It was that constant tweaking of this recipe as we went through the process with chicken parm. See, people don't realize, I don't think, they think we sit in this lab and we're tasting tomato sauce. That's not the case. We're putting it right on chicken parm.
Step one.
Step one, okay? And we're tasting it in situation,
On the
the
field.
way that someone would be eating it at their home, maybe in a small restaurant, or anything along those lines.
Maybe
And
they're
we're
hosting a
making
dinner
sure
party and
we've now tested it on, so many people, especially those nearest and dearest to us, our families. Your mother approves of it, my children approve of it.
kid tested, mother approved.
There you go.
This is your boneless, skinless chicken breast that's been lightly butterflied and pounded. All-purpose flour, whisked egg, and this is a homemade seasoned breadcrumb mix that we do here. You can obviously substitute any of your favorite at home. So into your flour first. Make sure you knock off any excess flour before going into the egg. I like to use a fork for the egg so that you don't get your hands too messy. Again, you're gonna wanna drain off any excess and into your bread. And then just make sure you really pack in your crumb so that there's no bald spots on your chicken. Whose idea was it first to bottle Carbone sauce?
I honestly don't remember, because I think we were all so passionate about it, from the minute that we thought of this idea.
It's years in the works.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about this for almost half a decade, if not more. I mean,
Definitely.
when we started Carbone, we knew we had something incredibly special, and we also knew that we had something that, just because we only have a limited amount of seats in each restaurant, that we weren't able to share with as many people as we wanted. And it immediately became a conversation for us of, how do we share this with more people? How do we share the flavors that Mario has created in the restaurant and bring them to the world?
All right, the next step is to fry our cutlet. We use pure olive oil for this. And it's important when you add the chicken to the pan to try to lay it away from you so that the oil never splashes up and burns you. A little helpful tip there. I think the whole thing is incredibly humbling to know that there's a demand for our product, that we are reaching audiences that have never been to our restaurants before, but are excited to take a little bit of Carbone home with them. So to see it on store shelves is incredibly humbling.
Yeah, it is. I got a photo the other day from a friend in Rhode Island, and they were in their car.
Big Italian community there.
Yeah, and they were in their car photographing them holding the sauce. I said, "Where'd you get that?" They said, "At the supermarket in Rhode Island." And I said, and that really warmed my heart, to Mario's point, because that's a friend who has never been to our restaurants, who I know from many years ago. Hadn't heard from them in a long time, and the idea of them being able to go pick up a jar of sauce and have a taste of Carbone at home was really truly a phenomenal feeling for me.
So you just want to season it. Salt. Our Carbone marinara sauce. I like to not go all the way to the edge, save a little bit on the outside.
What is the role of sauce in a chicken parm?
One of the major players there.
You only got 3 players, 4, right? You got the chicken, you got the breadcrumbs, you got the sauce, you got the cheese, right? So 25% of that equation is the sauce. And the truth is, I mean, in my opinion, I don't know what you think, Mario, the sauce has probably the largest effect because it can go wrong in so many ways. You can not only have a sauce that doesn't taste good, you can further that by having a sauce that doesn't taste good and putting way too much of it on, which I think is prevalent right now in society.
Over-saucing.
Over-saucing, yeah.
Hey, friends. So I'm gonna transfer our breast. Still in mistake room, you guys.
Then you are gonna put the tomato sauce on it. A couple tablespoons per piece.
We added a whole cup.
Because in the Italian-American culinary vernacular, the idea of abundance went too far in some of these areas. You know, you want to serve that abundant Italian-American meal, but you don't want to drown it out in far too much sauce. And if the sauce is too sweet or it's too acidic, I mean, your dish is totally ruined.
You know, we've put in hundreds of hours, you know, specifically designing this sauce so that it goes perfectly with chicken parm. And if you follow the, you know, the recipes and the incredible videos and instructions that Mario's put together for the home cook, I think that you have a very good chance when using our sauce at making something that's truly restaurant quality.
Parmesan cheese all the way to the edge. This is homemade mozzarella we make every day here. A little bit more Parmesan. And then we'll broil this.
I think we've achieved the goal, which was to bring Carbone into people's home and have that same joy and that same smile that we find people in the restaurant and leaving the restaurant feel when they're cooking at home. And I think that that's been the best thing about this whole experience.
Now we'll plate it. Grab our marinara again. Still nice and hot. Put a nice puddle of sauce down. Some fresh torn basil. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm very proud of what we made. Proud of you. Congratulations.
Proud of you. Congratulations. I think we made something really special. And I think we're gonna make a lot of people really happy, which is what we try to do.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I'm Francine Lackman, conversation with Paolo Gentiloni. He is the Commissioner for the Economy for the European Commission. Commissioner, thank you so much for joining us. Only last week, the European Commission actually changed their forecast, upgrading them for GDP for this year. Is this because of the Joint Recovery Fund money being dispersed in the summer, or is it more on the vaccination program accelerating in Europe?
Well, thank you. First of all, I would say both, because we have from one side, the vaccination campaign that is growing after initial delays now with good speed and with very strong coordination among member states in the European Union. And second, of course, that we factored in for the first time in this forecast the impact of Next Generation EU. And this is the reason why we estimate to have growth of 4.2 and 4.4% in this year and next year. And these are rather good figures, as you know, for the European economy, which is not an economy accustomed to very, very high level of growth. So a little bit of more optimism, but of course we still have a certain amount of uncertainty connected to variants of the virus and to the nature of the recovery. But all in all, more optimistic forecasts, I would say.
I was going to ask you, Commissioner, whether any of your forecasts or what your forecast would be were there to be variants in COVID-19 that would lead to further lockdowns.
Well, we had, as you know, a very good third quarter last year. And indeed, we were last autumn thinking to have a better winter. This is sure. And then we had in the last quarter of 2020 and the first quarter of this year, a 0 point something negative growth in the EU. But now, you know, also during these 2 quarters with 0 point something negative growth, we had part of our economy, especially manufacturing, but also a strong part of services already running. And now gradually the fact that restrictions are canceled is making all other sectors of the economy in the recovery. So we are quite optimistic on the fact that the second quarter and especially the second part of the year will be quite positive.
Commissioner, and of course these new variants, you know, coming from other places are extremely difficult to predict. But so given where we are now, how even will the recovery be amongst member states of the EU?
Well, the differences are there, of course. We have, and I think we should never forget that we have differences inside member states, because the impact of this crisis was not an equal one. And differences among winners and losers of this pandemic are very clear in our countries. Second, we have differences among sectors. I was mentioning sectors that are running, like manufacture or constructions, for example, and others like travel, tourism, entertainment industries that are still, despite the easing of restriction, lagging behind. And then we have differences among member states in the Union, because some member states had a less sharp recession in 2020. But I have to say that this next generation EU was exactly designed to reduce the risk of divergence among member states. As you know, it is not equally, this common debt is not equally distributed among member states. It is specifically targeted towards countries more affected by the pandemic and with higher economic difficulties. So it will help to manage and reduce this different speed of recovery. But we will have different speed in that case.
And a lot of these funds, of course, Commissioner, will go to the digital economy and to green projects. How can you be sure that this money is not squandered?
Well, we have, I think, a rather coherent strategy here in Brussels and in the European Commission. As you may remember, we launched this European Green Deal strategy just before the outbreak. it was December 2019, January 2020. And then, and this was not obvious, we were able to avoid to put on hold this strategy because of the pandemic. Exactly on the contrary, we decided in August, September last year to make it more ambitious, transforming our targets of reduction of emissions from 40% to 55% of reduction. And this honestly was a rather bold decision, because at the time we didn't have the changes that then came from countries like South Korea, South Africa, Japan, Canada, and especially in the US attitude towards the Paris Agreement and climate change. So I would say that we run some risk of having maybe a too advanced strategy, but now we have some advantages that are the advantages of the early mover.
Commissioner, how many plans have you received so far from member states? And are you pretty satisfied with how they look, or do you think there'll need to be revisions?
Well, we received until now 18 plans out of 27. And I think they are coming, the others in the coming weeks. We are quite satisfied of the fact that broadly these plans are coherent with the priorities that we decided. And this is very important because we need an added value for this common debt issued by the European Commission. And the added value is measured on two things. One, our priorities, so the climate change and the digital competitiveness, that were the two main issues at the core of our strategy. And second, to address some reforms that are needed to make our growth stronger and more sustainable in the future. All in all, I think that plans are broadly coherent with these goals, but of course the assessment of each single plan is ongoing, and it will last still 1 month. And I think in 1 month, the Commission will begin to propose to the Council to approve these plans.
Are you worried, Commissioner, about a delay in ratification, so that some of the countries are struggling to get it approved by Parliament in time? And what does that mean for your timeline of dispersing the funds?
Well, I'm quite optimistic, but maybe I'm always optimistic, but you should, because we until now had ratification coming from 22 out of 27 member states. And of the 5 missing member states, we have already had the approval in the lower house, both in 2 of these 5 countries. And one of the more challenging approval decision was taken just yesterday in Finland, because Finland needed to have a 2/3 majority, and it was not an easy game politically. So I am quite confident that we will have the approval, absolutely, and I hope and I work to make possible to have this approval within the month of May. What is the difference? The difference is that if we have all the ratifications, so also the 5 missing ratification in the next 10, 12 days, we can go to financial markets in June. Otherwise, if ratification will spill over to June, we will go in financial market in July. This is not a huge difference, but of course, the sooner the better. because in this case, we could easily deliver on what we call here the pre-financing, which is the fact that when you approve the plan, you are disbursing 13% of the amount to member states. And this should happen before the summer pause, but of course easier if we go into financial markets also in June and not only in July.
Commissioner, one of the other things that we're seeing in the economy, or the uptick in the economy, is the fact that actually many companies struggle to find the right components or raw materials. Do you worry that this will actually lead to significant inflation, which I know is not in your forecast at the moment, but is this your main worry for the European economy?
Well, indeed, we are perfectly aware of this problem, and we work to try to have the right balance, because of course we have an economic model here in EU which is a very open one, open to competition, open to investment, and based on the search of level playing field with partners, etc., etc. We don't have a protectionist attitude with our economy. Of course, we assisted during this pandemic to the fact that some of the value chain could be threatened by the situation. You were mentioning raw materials, but we saw this also in pharmaceutical. And so maybe for the first time, the European Union is working hard to have a sound industrial policy, and not only an efficient, open to competition single market. But of course, having a good industrial policy will not mean that we will close our doors.
There's currently also suspension of the EU fiscal rules in order to deal with debt and the pandemic. How long do you see the suspension lasting for?
Well, the orientation that we have and that we will confirm in probably 10 days is that this suspension, what we call here the general escape clause in our fiscal rules, will remain in place also for next year. And this, I think, is strongly needed in a moment where supportive policies are still important in our economies. There is a lot of discussion here on the fact that other global players like China or US are giving much stronger support to their economy. Well, I'm not enthusiastic of comparison, because these are very different economies and systems. But all in all, what is clear is that we still need supportive fiscal policy. And for this reason, the general escape clause will remain in place also next year.
You've also said this week that actually it's time to rethink taxation in Europe, that you're proposing a new framework that would cut red tape, reduce compliance costs, but also minimize tax avoidance. When do you think we could have these new rules in place?
Yes, indeed. Yesterday, we proposed what we call a business taxation strategy for the 21st century. So something, at least in its name, very, very ambitious. What is it about? I would say three things. One, supporting the effort that we are doing to reach an agreement at OECD level, because the voice of the European Union should be very loud and clear on the fact that we have now finally a possible global agreement. And this would be a game changer for international taxation, for reallocation of taxing rights, for introducing a minimal taxation at a global level, etc. Second, we have a series of short-term measures Just to give you an example, we will propose a directive about the so-called shell companies to reduce the use of these companies with no activity to increase tax avoidance and in some cases also money laundering. And second, we will decide something to make public the effective taxation of large companies in the Silken market, which is very important. Then we have a midterm strategy, which is to reach a common framework for business taxation in the EU. And we will work to table a proposal in 2 years from now, honestly, with the hope to have behind us a global agreement, because of course, having a global agreement will help strongly this European common framework for business taxation.
But Commissioner, I mean, you could argue that actually it's been almost a decade that Europe has tried to, have efforts for a corporate tax, which have been inconclusive. So why do you think this time is different?
Well, I think for two reasons. One is what I just said, that we could, and I think there is a good chance that this could become possible. We could base this on a global agreement. Of course, if there is a global agreement to have a partial reallocation of taxing rights in what in the OECD discussion we call the Pillar 1, and on the minimal taxation, and the Americans are pushing strongly in this direction. On this basis, to reach our unity in Europe will be much easier and, from my point of view, absolutely needed. But second, I think there is also another reason, and the other reason is the post-pandemic situation, because all Europeans know that we need stable and huge public resources to fund the recovery, and these resources need to be built also reducing the aggressive tax planning, the competition among member states to lower the tax basis, etc.
Do you think, Commissioner, then, I mean, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, maybe the U.S. proposal to have this minimum rate for companies was a real game changer, actually, in accelerating this movement?
Absolutely. If we look where we were in this conversation, well, this conversation is 6-7 years old in the OECD. But if we look where we were only 6 months ago, we were in a stalemate in this discussion. And the new proposals coming from Washington, they are not the solution in itself of the problem, but they are for sure a game changer that we strongly encourage.
Commissioner, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm here with E.B. Kelly. She's the woman behind Rockefeller Center in New York City, and her job is to oversee Rockefeller Center at a time when big cities like New York and districts like Midtown are struggling. So she needs to make her slice of Midtown a destination again. E.B., great to speak with you. As a managing director of Tishman Speyer, which owns Rockefeller Center, you are a landlord. So give me the 30-second elevator pitch about how you think about your mission and your purpose when it comes to reviving this property.
Sure, and so good to be with you. I used to say pre-COVID that my job here was to compete with other office buildings around the city. Now my job is to compete with your couch. I need to give you a reason to get off your butt and come here, a place that is dynamic and engaging, that provides you with moments of surprise. You never know what to expect, and to make it a distinctively engaging place to work, to eat, to visit, to shop. that's my job.
Okay, so you've got a lot of new things planned. Right now, the space is a bit of a construction zone, but you've got plans for the fall and for the winter. What are you spending the bulk of your time thinking about, working on, brainstorming around, solving?
What we spend most of our time here at Rockefeller Center doing right now in the spring of 2021 is making sure that we are doing the things and making the physical changes to this place to make it a great destination for folks to come back to the office, and to make sure that we continue to make it relevant and engaging for New Yorkers. So that's everything from the construction that's going on around the rink to make the rink even more open and a great place to come and skate, but also get a cup of coffee, to interesting art installations. We just opened last week the first ever solo artist takeover of the entirety of Rockefeller Center campus, the artist Sanford Biggers. And it's really important now, more so than ever, that we do that, to give New Yorkers a reason to come here, to come back, to be able to have experiences with one another. It's something that we're uniquely able to do here, right here in the center, heart of the heart, center of New York. And that's our job, to make sure that this place introduces you to new things and to take advantage of this moment in New York to really deliver for New Yorkers.
And that's part of what you're talking about, the unexpected delights, the things that'll surprise you. Of course, people also go to Rockefeller Center to go shopping. I want to hear a little bit about the mix of tenants you have right now. Obviously, old standbys like J. Crew are there. You've got specialty retail like the Lego store, for instance. Who are your anchor tenants right now, and how much has that changed, or how will that have changed compared to pre-COVID times?
Sure. So, I think that the joy of a campus like Rockefeller Center that both has Fifth Avenue retail along with the concourse that connects all of our buildings underground is that we have a real range. And so Lego, just as you mentioned, which previously had a great store in the Channel Gardens, is actually now opening their flagship right on the corner of 51st Street and Fifth Avenue, an even bigger, more experiential store. That will really be a capstone to a whole host of great kids retail that we have here at the center. We have FAO Schwartz, their new flagship is here, and Nintendo. So that's a whole collection of great shops that we have here. But we've also, thinking about sort of the street level experience, in the course of the last year, really sought to bring in some new energy, some new brands that you might not otherwise expect to find at Rockefeller Center. So we launched a program called Capsule, where we built out beautiful boxes and then invited retailers who might never have considered being able to come to Rockefeller Center. So for example, we have a retailer, Jill Lindsay, who has a terrific beauty and wellness shop in Fort Greene in Brooklyn that now opened here at the center, and it's a terrific addition to the mix. And the Capsule program is to enable those brands to come and to do it on a shorter term basis. Maybe it's 3 months, 6 months, a year, to really test it out. But we've also done sort of even more sort of experimental and try it out new approaches. So for example, last year at the holidays, we had a store that was available to us, and we said, hey, we called up Missy Robbins, who's a great friend of the center, and said, you've got a really interesting concept, MP Specialties, your prepared pastas and sauces and grab and go. Come here and let's do that for a couple months at the center, which was great. It allowed Missy to make sure that her staff kept working at this sort of very uncertain time, and provided a great little new amenity and retail experience to the center. That's at street level. We're doing lots and lots of exciting food options in the concourse as well. And so when talking about what I think the anchors will be, I think certainly food and beverage will be a really anchor part of the overall Rock Center retail experience.
Food has always been a draw. There's no question about that, but it feels like it's even more so now. What do you think it is about the past year that has made food even more important than it used to be as a point of gathering?
I think that COVID has really reinforced in so many ways that food, the community that food provides, both the physical experience of being together with one another, but the the universe of people who are employed and part of the food ecosystem, that it's really integral to the fabric of New York. I think you know a city, you know New York by its food. And I think what we have always felt at Rockefeller Center, but even more so over the course of the last year, is that our job is to provide a range of really interesting food experiences here that showcase the best of New York. So that's everything from Frenchette, a James Beard award-winning restaurant, opening their next location here at Rockefeller Center, or the restaurateur Ignacio Matos coming here this summer. Great restaurants where you'll have sort of a beautiful, terrific experience. And then the Queens Night Market, right? A beloved New York institution that had a home out in Flushing Meadows that now is here at the center, where you can get an affordable lunch option and try out a whole range of different cuisines from, whole different places around the world. So I think our job is to find those great New York partners, to bring them here and to give them a platform to be able to amplify their voice and be able to have that offering get to an even wider range than it might have been otherwise.
I totally agree. And I feel like food is one of those things that every city does differently. I mean, you can go to any city and honestly go find a Lego store and buy some Lego pack, but you can't get certain foods anywhere else but New York. So to highlight that is such a draw. You mentioned the Queens Night Market that'll be in Rockefeller Center. That obviously will use up a lot of outdoor space. Can you explain how you're rethinking and leveraging your existing outdoor space and creating some new outdoor space as well?
Absolutely. So, we have always benefited here from being what I like to say is sort of the original urban campus, right? We're not just a building or a collection of buildings. We are a place that is interconnected by the public spaces, with the rink, right? The most iconic public space in all of New York right in the middle of it. But I think what COVID has really shown us and all New Yorkers, but a lesson that we've absolutely learned, is that New Yorkers are resilient. They can bundle up. They can enjoy programming, eating, being together outside all year round. And so what we've been doing is thinking about our public spaces, our plazas, our streets, the areas in and around our buildings as places for programming. And it's everything from being able to have incredible works of art, like the Sanford Biggers piece that we have, in the Channel Gardens, all the way to people playing cornhole in Center Plaza in the middle of the summer. So our job should be to provide places for people to connect, to come together, to have a cup of coffee, to get we had Other Half Brewery, a beloved Gowanus beer company that had a truck here last summer. And folks, would never have expected to have that here at Rockefeller Center. But, all we did was say, hey, this is a great public space. Let's put a truck here. Let's put out some chairs and tables, and let's invite the world to come and check it out. So I think that's something that we have done, but we'll do even more year round, to encourage people to come together and to connect outside.
And I remember you're saying that you're also building a park on top of Radio City Music Hall, something that NBC wants to use as part of their filming. I mean, that's another big draw and another big part of what you're working with at Rockefeller Center. Tina Fey's 30 Rock many years ago, and of course SNL, they're all situated in Rockefeller Center. People all over the world know about this place and feel like they know the people who work on that campus. How much is Rockefeller Center a set for TV shows?
Well, I think that's a great question. Certainly, NBC being here, filming 365 days a year and sending out, Rockefeller Center as the image of New York, is certainly, Rockefeller Center has become synonymous with New York as a function of that. It's not just NBC, we have shows and movies that are filming here constantly. And I think, this place is so iconic. It is so synonymous with New York that we have lots and lots of inquiries and, photo shoots from top of the Rock, our observation deck at the top of 30 Rock, to the park, just as you mentioned, Radio Park, which we're building on the roof of Radio City Music Hall. So I like to think that, what we're delivering here with both the iconic location, but also the experiences and the people, if you want to see what New York looks like, you come here. And so that's why a whole lot of folks want to come and film and shoot here.
And who knows, you might run into Seth Meyers at lunchtime while you're doing that as well. Is it more important, do you think, to win over New Yorkers to Rockefeller Center or to win over out-of-towners?
I think that visitors to New York want to see New Yorkers. And so our driving mission here is to make sure that this place continues to be beloved and a New York staple for New Yorkers first and foremost. I think that Rockefeller Center has a special place in New Yorkers' hearts, and our job is to continue to deliver on that emotional connection and also to surprise them. To say, hey, I never would have expected to find, I don't know, Rough Trade, the Williamsburg record shop that just closed operations and is now coming to Rockefeller Center. Wow, that's a great New York get. And they came to Rockefeller Center because we said, hey, we want to have interesting experiences for New Yorkers. And then, of course, out-of-town visitors, domestic visitors, international travelers, I think they want to come to see where the New Yorkers are. And so that's what we are focused on, making this a great place for New Yorkers, a place for them to rediscover, to be surprised, to be excited by what they can find here, and certainly in so doing, welcome the visitors.
And maybe they'll tweet about it or post it on Instagram, and that'll get more views and get more people into it as well and go viral. What space in Midtown or New York City do you see as competition? Who are you trying to lure people over from? Or do you see Rockefeller Center as complementary to other parts of town? You're kind of the yin to Times Square's yang.
I think that we don't look at a particular other location in New York and say that's our competition. I think that we look at the remarkable development of the 5 boroughs of New York over the course of the last decade, and the fact that you might find the best restaurant in New York in Queens, you might find it in Bushwick, you might find it in Jersey City across the river. And our job is to make sure that we have great restaurants that compete with that. So you might also say, I've got a great office building that's in Midtown South, in downtown, across the river in Brooklyn. I think there are so many interesting and exciting things that are going on as more and more of the city is expanding, and there's new development and new activity in different neighborhoods, that our job, look, we are central, right? We are right here in the heart. We're so close to Grand Central, so close to Penn Station. That's never changing. But what is changing is the draw of the exciting things that are going on all around the city. And so to make sure that we stay in keeping with that and stay current with that.
Okay, final question to you, Evie. What do you look to as a best practice? What cities or places outside of New York inspire you in terms of influencing how you think about Rockefeller Center and improving what you offer?
I think I'd answer that question in 2 ways. The first is, at Rockefeller Center, we are right now in the middle of a real wholesale reimagining of our concourse. And the concourse is both, sort of the spine of the center. It connects all of the office buildings. It provides great access to the subway and access to the rink. But it's a place that perhaps folks might think about as, well, that's where I'll go and grab a sandwich, but there's not much more for me there. Our view is that the concourse and this incredible underground world can really be a destination in its own right. So I think about a city like Tokyo, where you are just as likely to find an incredible restaurant at street level as you are to find it hidden away, tucked in a subway station underground, where you need to know how to get in to get the access point. And so the fact that we have this incredible underground city that can really benefit from 24-hour activity. I mean, think about the fact that, 20 Saturdays a year, Saturday Night Live is filming upstairs, and those guys don't wrap until, goodness, the middle of the night. That should be something where you can then come downstairs and go to a great hidden bar, a restaurant that's still serving great meals. So I think that a place like Tokyo, where you have that vibrancy and that life, but that happens not just at street level, but in unexpected locations, I think that is a real inspiration for us and what we're doing in the concourse. I think the other piece is, I think we get great sort of inspiration in looking at dynamic campuses for companies like a Facebook or a Google that are really thinking about the experience of their people and making sure that the place that they come to work every day is something that's not just that enables them to work, but that engenders pride. Because I think at the end of the day, our job is to make sure that people who come to work here at Rockefeller Center every day feel tremendous pride of place. It's a place they can't wait to show their friends and family. How lucky am I that I get to work in the place where Saturday Night Live films, there's ice skating in the rink, and there's great food downstairs. And that sense of excitement and ownership of this place is what we want to convey to all of the people who come to work here every day.
All right, great stuff. I really appreciate your time. Evie Kelly is Managing Director at Tishman Speyer, which owns Rockefeller Center. Thank you.
Can you hear that? No? Understandable. It's been quite faint lately. Drowned out by trading and tickers, assets and interest rates, bulls and bears, by the things that have come to define it, but that have little to do with why it's so powerful. It's the beating heart of capitalism, the collective sound of the people who build and borrow, strengthen and serve, invent and ignite. And it's ready to come roaring back with our help, our know-how, our vision. Just listen. And you'll hear the sound of change. It's happening all around us. And if we stand together, we can write a new future for capitalism, where equity is elevated across the board, people are valued as much as profit, and everyone aspires to a higher bottom line.
Want to try commuting to work on two wheels? Here's how to do it. First, think about how far you need to go. If you're only going a few miles, a bicycle is an extremely efficient mode of transportation. But if you don't want to spend a lot of money, or you don't have anywhere to store it, bike sharing programs like City Bike will get the job done. If you're willing to spend at least $650, brands like Specialized, Cannondale, and Giant offer a wide range of options to fit every type of rider. If your commute gets into double-digit miles, you might want to consider a scooter, or even a motorcycle. Scooters are great for urban centers. They're cheap to maintain and easy to park. A motorcycle is the way to go if you need to use the highway a lot, or you want to get out of town on the weekends. Get your license, take a safety course, and remember, keep the shiny side up.
I'm Jonathan Ferro, and I'm pleased to say I'm joined by Dr. Cecilia Rouse. She has served under 2 Democratic presidents, President Clinton and President Obama, and now a third under President Biden as the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. Dr. Rouse, fantastic to get you with us today. And I think we should probably start there. Your experience through 3 Democratic administrations now, 3 different presidents. How different is this one?
Well, yeah, every presidency, every administration is a little bit different. This one I feel is different in the following sense. It came in not just with an economic crisis, which was the Obama experience, but an economic crisis that was caused by a health crisis, which is one in a century, we hope. And what I would argue, a democratic crisis, having come on the heels of a somewhat tumultuous transition. So this administration came in with extraordinary problems to be solved, and it came in with extraordinary focus and preparedness. And so this administration feels like it's just off to a very fast start in terms of addressing these really important issues that our country is facing.
What would you say you've learned through 3 administrations? Early days in this one, but for you personally and for your personal philosophy and how that's evolved over the last several decades as well. What do you think is different this time for you personally?
Well, this time I'm working for a president who believes in markets, and there's no question about that, but also understands, having taken, well, I don't know if he's taken Economics 101, but I've taught Economics 101. So we know that perfectly competitive markets have places where they don't work so well. And this is a president who really believes there's an important role for government to play, both in ensuring that our private sector works well, but understanding that there are public goods, that there are coordination problems, that there are existential threats such as climate change, that the private sector is going to have a difficult time fully and quickly responding to. So this is a president who deeply understands and believes that government, I wrote an op-ed last year called "Government's Not a Dirty Word," that there is an important role for government to play in helping us to get our economy back on its feet in terms of getting past this pandemic. But it also has an important role to play in encouraging investment in infrastructure, in encouraging research and development and innovation, in providing an adequate safety net for our, those who are more vulnerable or get, unlucky, and for investing in our people. And so that I think is quite different. And he truly, truly believes this, and truly believes that his job is to help the middle class, those who are working for their living, to ensure that they have a good job and a good life.
Dr. Rouse, what is the middle class? How do we define that in America in 2021?
Well, I often ask myself that question. I think we're thinking, certainly the president has made in terms of revenue raising, which he also is very committed to raising revenue to pay for the investments that he believes are important. One could argue that a middle class is those making less than $400,000 a year. I'll be quite honest with you, Jonathan. I don't fully know. I think of middle class as being those who are not the 1%, those who are not earning, tremendous income, are quite wealthy, who really benefited from the economic policies of the past 20, 30, 40 years.
Why do you think they have benefited in the last several decades more than most?
Well, I think that the economic policy that we've been following over the last several decades is really has its birth in Reaganism with trickle down or supply side economics, where we've come from a perspective that the private sector is much more efficient than the public sector, and that by reducing taxes, we can spur greater economic growth, whether it's that by reducing taxes, we increase labor supply, by decreasing taxes on corporations, we spur greater investment. And I think what we've seen instead is that the tax decreases on capital have not spurred the kind of investment that then the economic models that I certainly was taught 200 years ago suggest would have happened. I think we don't see quite the labor supply disincentive from taxes that our early models suggest. I think the elasticities aren't quite as great there. I would add as well that we've seen automation So, we're seeing a displacement of labor in favor of capital there, and with increased globalization. And so what we've had is just increasing inequality, increasing income inequality. And those forces of globalization and the automation, and I would also argue increasing concentration, which means that our markets aren't quite as competitive, have just meant that we're seeing, again, a hollowing out of the middle. And I feel that is fraying our democracy. And we know that those who are being left behind are really feeling it.
Do you think we can have this conversation without also having a conversation about monetary policy as well?
Well, I hope so, because, the Fed is quite independent from the federal government. But we understand that monetary policy is very, very important when we think about the overall economy. And our Federal Reserve has been rather hamstrung over the past, I don't know how many years, but several years, where interest rates are so low, it's just at a lower bound. So monetary policy hasn't been very effective. That's really the motivation behind the new framework. But I really, that's the Fed's lane, and we really do value the Fed's independence.
And I understand that, Dr. Rouse, and I don't want to get you into any trouble by going into a sensitive area, but a lot of people might suggest that they have contributed to wealth inequality, and there's some of the issues that we're trying to tackle right now, particularly on quite basic issues on who has the assets and who doesn't. And quite clearly what we've seen over the last several decades is great support for assets and maybe not for wages, for labor. And as you touched on the difference between taxing capital and taxing labor, I just wonder if that's something we're almost trying to offset now. It's the consequences of very loose monetary policy and the wealth inequality that maybe that's contributed to.
Well, look, it may be a contributor to it. I don't, I'm not going to lean into, and I actually haven't thought about to what extent it may be due to monetary policy versus fiscal policy. But I will say I do think our fiscal policies have contributed to this, over the last couple of decades.
We often hear a lot of politicians, whether it's in Washington or elsewhere, use this word fair. And fair is such a strong emotive word because no one wants to be perceived as being unfair. When we talk about making a system fairer again, particularly on income taxes, what does that mean? What does fair mean?
Well, I think fair means that, one, in the United States, we have a progressive income tax. And so I think it means having a progressive income tax, that those who are given more are contributing a bit more. But I also think when we look at what the share of corporate tax revenue contributing to GDP, that has fallen tremendously over the past decade. And so, corporations use our public goods. They drive on, they have components that drive on the roads. They're using our infrastructure. And so they should also be contributing to the revenue that supports that. So I think, you raise a fair point. I don't know that we have literally everybody. I don't think we need to say that everybody pays exactly the same proportion or have a definition that's that stringent. But we do know that the wealthiest among us have been paying less. Even though they benefit as much from our public services as well.
Because a lot of people often throw around that stat, and Dr. Rouse, I'm sure you've heard it a million times, that the top 1% pay almost 40% of total income taxes. And within that 1%, those that pay those taxes, I'm sure you often hear yourself, you'll get the feedback, well, I feel like I'm paying my fair share. Am I not paying my fair share? Do we need to define that a little bit more finely and avoid something that I hear the president trying to do, which is perhaps avoid the divisive language between the people who have been successful and had success and those that maybe who have not. How do we define these terms just a little bit more aggressively to perhaps help society understand who is paying what we might consider the fair share and who is not?
Well, look, I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, and so I can't respond in that kind of quantitative way. But what we do know, for example, is that incomes have been largely stagnant over the certainly over the past decade, past 20, 30 years, that the median household has not seen great increases in their incomes. And so as a result, their health insurance, their healthcare costs have grown as a fraction of their incomes. Their educational costs have grown as a fraction of their incomes. And so, and they're paying a lot in income as well in terms of taxes as well. So I think that what we think of by fair is that a median household can pay their bills, pay their rent, get decent health insurance because everybody needs healthcare, that they can get their children educated because they want their children to have a better life and to be well taught, and still have some money left over so they don't feel like they don't know how they're going to make ends meet at the end of the month. And so, that's what I think by fair is that that people work hard. They should be rewarded for that work. They should be contributing to government services because we all benefit from them. And that those who have more and who have, earned considerably more, we know that wealth has become much more concentrated in our country over the past 20, 30, 40 years, that they can contribute more because we all benefit. And as a society, as an economy, we benefit when everybody's brought along.
Corporations could clearly do more, and corporations have started doing more. And I think it's interesting that particularly over the last couple of weeks, we've started to see banks, fast food, retailers come out and lift their minimum wages. And this is without it set by policy down in Washington. I just wonder, do you think that the administration has contributed to that in some way, that you're helping to anchor the narrative over what these companies should be paying people in America?
Well, the president strongly supports increasing the federal minimum wage, which is $7.50 an hour, and he supports a $15 minimum wage. I think what we're seeing here is we had a massive disruption in our economy over this past year with the pandemic. And we've seen, because of the effective vaccination rollout, which exceeded what I expected back in January when Joe Biden first took office, and when we have the American Rescue Plan put money in the pockets of families and kept many businesses afloat, we are now awakening. So we're in the early stages. Only about 38% of working age adults are fully vaccinated. So we see some labor demand exceeding labor supply. And I think what we're seeing is the market working. So we know when firms are looking for workers and workers are not fully vaccinated, they've got childcare arrangements they have to work out. They have to find a new job, which takes some time to find a suitable job. We see some misalignments there, and firms have to pay higher wages in order to attract those workers. If because they also recognize that incomes have been rather flat for the average American over the last decade or two, and that we can't continue along this way, and so they're raising wages for that reason. I think that's just how the market works.
As you know, we have more than 8 million jobs available in America right now, 8.12 million job openings, I think, Dr. Rouse, and I'm sure you have the numbers and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the number. What we've seen in the recent payrolls report was a significant downside surprise, a big miss, and a lot of people grappled with that number. And I think you just listed a few issues as to what's maybe holding back the labor supply to meet that demand at the moment. One that wasn't mentioned is an argument that's been pushed forward by Republican governors quite aggressively in the last couple of weeks. I think it's more than 20 Republican states now who are pushing the argument that it's the enhanced unemployment insurance that is holding back people from coming back to work. We're going to see some real-world case studies play out in America in the next several months to see what happens. What do you think is going to happen in those states now they've pulled back from that additional unemployment insurance?
Well, look, the May report, which reflected the employment in April, and let's be very clear, the reference week in April was the week that included April 12th. The week of April 12th, only 18% of working age adults were fully vaccinated. Again, that was early days, this rollout, and us feeling as if and understanding that we're getting through this pandemic more quickly than we expected. But a minority of working age adults were actually fully protected for going out into the real world. I personally believe that was part of the combination of what contributed to that downside, that we all felt like, oh, we're through the other side. But in the reality, when we took that measurement, it was it takes 5 or 6 weeks for someone to become fully vaccinated. That was measured the week before all adults became eligible. So I personally believe that it was largely reflecting the fact that the state of the pandemic is changing rapidly due to the vaccination rollout, and that we were looking backwards. That said, I think it's a multitude of factors which are contributing to demand coming back more quickly than supply. As I mentioned, not everybody's fully vaccinated. People have childcare concerns. People have to look for a job and they want to find a suitable job. People have been out of the labor market for a year. And we're not automatons. We're not just robots you switch back on. People have understood, I think even understanding the effectiveness of these vaccines was greater than I think I fully expected. The CDC's announcement was that just a week ago that said, if you're fully vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask outside and possibly not inside, and it reduces transmissibility. This is all new news. And it takes some time for us to really adjust our behaviors and start searching. So I fully expect that over the coming months, these misalignments are going to work themselves out because we do have a market, and that we will get back to a full recovery, and that by the end of the year, we're going to be, in really good shape.
Dr., are you concerned that if we do snap back, that the Republican governors that made the decision to remove the additional unemployment insurance will make the argument that it was a policy mistake to have it at that level to begin with?
Look, we had the U.S. had, grew the first estimate of GDP growth in the first quarter was 6.4%. We were leading the Eurozone. We are doing well. We got unemployment insurance claims this week. We get them every Thursday morning, and those have continued to decline. They have been declining steadily since January. We have seen, through the American Rescue Plan, people were able to buy. And so we've seen income support. So I would argue that because of the American Rescue Plan, that has kept businesses afloat, that has allowed families to put food on the table, to pay their rent, and to continue to interact in our economy. And that because of that, we're in a position to basically snap back. That if we had let businesses go out of business, if we had let more people become sick because the vaccine rollout hadn't been as effective, this economy would not be in the shape it's in today. So, there will become a day that we do not need these additional supports. There's no question. This was designed to get us to the other side of the pandemic, but we're not quite there yet.
To build on that, I wonder if our own personal biases, the fact that I'm vaccinated, I have a job, you're probably vaccinated and you have a job, are almost shaping our perceptions of where we are in this pandemic. There's a real temptation, and I'm guilty of it, and I'm very open about that. I have this feeling now that the pandemic is over, that we're moving on from this and we need to get back to normal. And I sense from you, Dr. Rouse, you don't believe that's the case.
I think it's happening. I know that of an employer that I will not name that made an announcement to its very large staff that come August, everybody's going to be back. So these are all people that had jobs. And many of the employees were very concerned they weren't quite ready to be just snapping back and going into jobs and going into the office. We've been told for a year, venture outside and you may die. So it's going to take some time for people to really adjust. And I think it will happen. It's happening, as you just said, for those of us that are fully vaccinated and have had jobs, we're venturing out, feeling more confident. And I know that will build very quickly. I have utter faith in the American people, but we have to understand what we have been through. The economy, we have a almost $23 trillion economy, 8 million jobs down from where we were last year. It's just going to take some time for it all to come back together and for us to hit our stride again.
We've talked for almost 20 minutes and haven't discussed inflation yet, which I imagine is quite refreshing for you, given where the conversation has been over the last couple of months. Were you disappointed after we'd spent 12 months discussing how the risk of doing too little was greater than the risk of doing too much, to have a lot of criticism come from people that you might expect to be in your corner, the likes of Summers, the likes of Blanchard, and to some degree, even the likes of Furman more recently? Were you disappointed by some of the criticism of your policies?
Look, I believe it's a broad church, and I have utter respect for, Larry Summers and Olivier Blanchard and Jason Furman. They are some of our leading minds in economics, and they raise very important potential risks. But the fact is that the risk of doing too little, at least in my perception, and I think many others, certainly the administration, outweighed the risk of doing too. The risk of doing too little was much worse than the risk of doing too much. So we are watching, as we pointed out earlier. That is the purview of the Fed, but we are watching. We certainly do not want to do harm to the U.S. economy with our policies. But let's go back to where we were in January. We didn't know what the vaccine rollout was going to be that affected. So we didn't know how long this pandemic was going to last. We had people who were there were food lines that were, stretching blocks. People were well behind in their mortgage payments and paying their rent. Children were still not back in school. This economy was still largely at a standstill, and we are starting to come out of that. And that's a fabulous thing. But it's going to take some time to get all of those realignments. We know there are supply chain issues. One of my staff members is getting married, which is very exciting, but she was looking for a wedding dress last weekend. And everywhere she went, the salespeople said, sorry that the inventory is down, but we've had supply chain issues. The designers stopped designing because they didn't know what the demand would look like, when it would come back. Would people go back to big weddings or would they be smaller? We have been through an extraordinary period. And it's going to take some time for this economy to rebuild. And we know that there are going to be bumps along the way.
From your perspective, and this is a question that I've asked members of central banks before, and I'd love to ask the question to you as well. The base case seems to be that some of these issues are transitory. They'll be addressed with time. They're base case issues as well, just in terms of the base effects kicking in over the last 12 months into where we are now compared to where we were 12 months ago. So the base effects, the supply shortages, the bottlenecks, all of those things, Dr. Rouse. How will we know if the consensus is wrong? What would you look for in the incoming data and the details over the next perhaps 12 months or so? How would we know if we're wrong, and when would we know?
So again, I'm not trying to get into the lane of the Fed. We're certainly watching.
No. Just from your perspective, Dr. Rouse. Not for the central bank. Just from your perspective, is there a certain time where you'd expect this transitory issue to fade?
Sure. So I try not to put too much in stock into any 1 month report, whether it's a great report, so an employment report, or a disappointing report. I do not want to put stock in any one report. But as long as the trends are towards increasing employment and relatively robust, because we were in a very deep hole, we have a long way to go to build out of that. Certainly don't want to see inflation that's getting out of control. So several months where month on month, the inflation rate looks high because, the annual inflation rates are really going to suffer from these base effects for some period of time since prices were depressed for, much of last year. So I'm looking at the trends. And so as long as the trends are headed in the direction of the supply chains are healing, workers are getting back to work, and prices are moderating, I will think that we're on a good path. Inflation, the real trick there that Larry Summers, for example, is worried about is whether inflation expectations become de-anchored. And that's a lot of that is psychology. It's about expectations. And so I know the Federal Reserve is trying to communicate. And again, that's their lane, not ours. But I will be looking for the overall trends. And so far, the trends have been heading in the direction that these policies have been effective and that the economy is reopening.
Dr. Rouse, just a final question for me. And thank you, by the way, for so much of your time today for this conference. For you personally, at some point you will decide to move on from this administration. What would you like to see happen during your tenure here under President Biden? How would you define your own success? What are the metrics for you?
So you asked about the third tour. So the one thing that I've become humble about in doing a third tour is that a president can do many things, but especially since we have 3 branches, and with Congress having to pass things, I'm not holding my breath there as much as I would love to see progress there. For me, where I will define success is one, part of what Joe Biden is about is President Biden is about ensuring that any economic growth we have is more widely shared. And some of that means just understanding what's happening in different populations. So at the Council of Economic Advisors, for example, we're working with statistical agencies Are we, can we increase samples so that we can understand what's happening in Native American country and Indian country among African Americans? And so is our data wide enough that we can be really monitoring what's happening? That will be an achievement if we can succeed there. It seems very small, but it'll be important for understanding what questions to be asking and assessing where we're going. And if we can, make if we can reduce income inequality by a little bit with the child tax credit, making our the reforms and even just some of the reforms in our tax that we've proposed on the tax side, so that we've just rebalanced the federal government and the contribution of the federal government, I will consider those wins.
Dr. Rouse, thank you so much for your time. Dr. Rouse, there, the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors.
Thank you.
All right, so great to hear from her. Carol Massar here with Joel Weber. Joel, today reminded me that we've got some really major issues going on, and these things are going to take time, whether we're talking about COVID, it's going to take a while still to work its way through the system, the economy as well, and figuring out the global economy.
Right, and the guests that we've had, I thought were fabulous to talk about some. Obviously, Dr. Anthony Fauci, big name,
right.
And interesting stuff to say, right? Like not only about masks, but about the booster shot, and like maybe we won't need them.
Right. It's a reminder, like, listen, he's been our go-to voice, right, over the last 12, 13 months. But it's a reminder that as we move along, things that we maybe think we have to do, maybe we don't.
Yeah. We also had the Jennifer Jacobs, how she got that story, which, within Bloomberg News, like we all feel like that was one of the big stories of last year, of how Hope Hicks contracted the virus, and she got that story. It was like the scoop of the century, it felt like at the time.
It was.
And it was great to hear about how she got the story.
What was really cool is that this whole week has been, right, about peeling back the pages of how you guys do it and how the reporters do it and the editors, and to really hear how she's been working the story and really bringing it out.
Yeah.
So do you have a favorite moment?
Well, there's all those, and power policy and chicken parmesan. I personally,
how does that come together?
Yeah, Carbone, talk about power, right? Like, yeah. So I thought that was just a delightful little moment. And those guys are hilarious. Like, I think that was like one of the funniest videos I've seen. So that is my personal favorite. My wife is a big lover of chicken parm, so I feel like I might be able to come through and like give her something. And that little tip about not going all the way to the edges of the chicken with the sauce, that was pro level.
I never knew it was so complicated.
It was.
And I'm going to say my favorite moment is hearing from Anthony Fauci. He really has been a guiding voice for so many of us, and just hearing the latest on what he had to say about maybe also, about the mask confusion. We're all kind of going through it. You're right about it in the how-to issue of the magazine about how
I'm still wearing mine, for the record. Even though I'm vaccinated, I've got mine. I'm still doing it.
Well, it's been a really, really good day. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us for day 4 of the Bloomberg Business Week. We hope you enjoyed it. And thanks again to all of our speakers. And we do want to thank our sponsors as well. Our solutions sponsor, Deloitte, our presenting sponsor, InterSystems, and of course, our supporting sponsor, Indiana Economic Development Corporation, for making this virtual event possible. If you'd like more information from our sponsors, do check out and visit the resources tab on your screen.
And most of all, thank you to all of you for being such an engaged audience. The hashtag is #TheBusinessWeek. Please engage with us. We'd love to hear from you.
You guys have been great on social. We'll be back tomorrow for the last day of the event. We're going to hear from Emily Weiss from Glossier, Carlos Brito from AB InBev, and also Byron Allen of Allen Media Group. We're also going to learn how to start a tequila company.
I mean, yesterday you had some drinking. Now you're going to have a little bit more tomorrow. Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
Nick Jonas weighing in on that. Also, Deepak Chopra. He's going to teach us really how to meditate, something we've needed so much over the last year. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. And we hope you have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern.
Thanks.